actually, I want to start off with a question to everyone. Are you a boy or are you a girl? I know it's a really weird question, but I want you to really think about where this innate sense of being kind of comes from. Does anyone know the technical definition of gender? I'm not going to call anyone, just kind of raise your hand maybe. Maybe? Okay. I can guarantee that if you're thinking anything having to do with physical attributes, actually you're wrong. See, gender actually doesn't have anything to do with that. Whoops, uh-oh. Okay. In today's society and societies like ours, the person presiding over your birth actually has the most say in what your gender is going to be. You know, your doctor or midwife or what have you will take a look at the baby and decide based on physical attributes. They will select a gender, male or female. Okay, I guess this is going backwards. This decision is actually regarded as a crucial medical decision, to the point where if a decision cannot be made, it's actually regarded as a medical emergency, despite it not actually being it's usually not caused by any medical condition. You know, everyone's born. Okay, the big thing is people aren't actually born male or female, and this is really hard to wrap your head around at first, I know, but the thing is, gender isn't decided by anything physical. It's not even decided by your genital function. It's literally decided by just your genital appearance. You know, if a woman cannot give birth, she does not lose her gender. She's still considered a woman. Just all of that physical stuff, that's your biological sex. It actually doesn't have anything to do with your gender. Gender instead is a social category. People might attempt to define it in terms of genitals. However, the way gender works, you know, if you look at these pictures, you know, male, female, you're not looking at the people's genitals, or you're not doing a genetic test to decide their chromosomes or anything like that. What you're doing is analyzing the way that they might walk, the way that they might talk, the way that they would behave, and then putting them in a social category based on that. That is your gender. That is the behavior and attributes that society takes and puts into a category and says this gender or that gender. Now, these categories are basically made up, and the things in them. You know, who says that a boy can't wear a skirt? I mean, there's no law of physics that prevents a boy from wearing a skirt. In society, we're just taught that boys don't wear skirts. Skirts are only things that girls do. There's nothing to actually, you know, if a boy wears a skirt, he might get picked on. But the people picking on him, they were taught that boys don't wear skirts. And the people who taught them were taught that boys don't wear skirts. And the people that taught those people were taught that boys don't wear skirts. And it's just this kind of self-perpetuating thing that everybody in society unanimously agrees on. And it's really kind of strange when you start really thinking about it and trying to pick it apart. So next thing, let's get into gender assignment. Your gender assignment that's what, you know, when the doctor comes out with the baby and says it's a boy or it's a girl, that is your gender assignment. Your gender is usually decided by genital appearance. However, there's a really big flaw with this system, because telling someone they have to fit into a certain category or a certain role just because of a physical attribute, it's kind of sketchy at best. Your gender is completely mental. It doesn't have anything to do with your physical attributes. Some people would argue that, you know, there's sex hormones, and those do have certain sways to an extent. However, for example, if a woman has an unusually high level of testosterone, or she takes testosterone supplements, there are physical changes that might happen, but it's not going to mentally change her into a man. That's not really how it works. That's where gender identity comes in. Your gender identity is the gender that you feel most comfortable with. It's the social role that you identify as. Everybody self-identifies, even people whose assignments are the same as how they identify. If your assignment is different than how you identify, that's termed transgender, and then the opposite is cisgender. Self-identification is the thing that makes gender completely work. For example, I could call you a boy, all I wanted. Everybody in the world could call you a boy, but that doesn't make you a boy, and vice versa. It's not until you identify that way, until you stand up and say, yes, I am a girl, or yes, I am a boy, or actually, no, I am neither one, which is possible. Gender is all about you. It's not about anyone else. It's a very, very personal thing. And that gets into probably one of the biggest things that I want to touch on today. Male and female, they're not completely exclusive or mutually exclusive categories, and they're also not the only two genders out there. In societies like ours, Western societies generally, we gender everything. It has to be either male or female. There's no variation between. However, within this society and other societies, there are people who don't identify as male or female. This is usually termed as identifying non-binary, male, female to binary, and then not identifying as either one, non-binary. I actually identify as non-binary. I identify as agender. That will be up there in a second. So information about non-binary genders. This is a list, by no means all-inclusive, of possible genders that someone who identifies as non-binary might identify as. It's really difficult in today's society to escape identifying with a gender. Gender is so intrinsically connected to how we interact with people and our social role and even legal role that it doesn't really make sense in people's minds sometimes that you could be neither male or female, since it's been kind of ground into you since birth. Yeah, agender is up there. It's right there. Ta-da. Facebook, actually, if any of you have taken a look at Facebook's gender selection lately, they have a list of over 50 different genders, including non-binary and transgender identities. So, yay, Facebook. Okay, self-identification. As I said earlier, everybody self-identifies. It's a really big part of growing up. A really good analogy for this is actually something that Mr. Calderon suggested, political identity. Imagine a little tiny elementary school you. You're probably not concerned about whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat at that age. Your biggest problem is probably, who you're going to play with on the playground. It's the same thing with gender. And like with political identity, as you grow up, you'll start learning more about what exactly being a Republican means or being a Democrat means. And you might say, you know what? I actually feel more like I'm a Republican rather than a Democrat, like my parents. Or you might say, you know what? I'm totally a Democrat. I am totally what my parents have, taught me, or that I kind of parroted when I was younger, because, at that age, your parents are always right. Gender is the same way. When you're a little kid, you don't really think about it. You don't really bother questioning it. And then as you get older, particularly with transgender people, tend to kind of pick up on this a little bit faster, since it's kind of a little bit more of a visceral thing for them. You'll start finally going on this kind of a self-discovery. Even people who identify as the gender they were assigned at birth still have to do this, because you have to establish an identity separate from what you've just kind of heard from your parents and your elders the entire time. So I'm going to focus on transgender and gender nonconforming. Who in here thinks that all transgender people want to get surgery? Oh, okay. Actually, see, the only definition of transgender is that your identification does not match what you were assigned at birth. And same with gender nonconforming, it's just that you don't fit a traditional gender role within that society. In different societies, the definition of it can change. The thing is, not all trans people get surgery. Not all trans people even want it. It's completely up to individual choice. It is whatever you are comfortable with. A transgender person, their goal is to feel comfortable, not to look like the prime example of masculinity on the cover of a magazine or something like that. It's, some people will be completely comfortable with their bodies. Some people might have a higher sense of discomfort, and they might want to get one surgery. They might want to get multiple. They might want to go on hormone replacement therapy. It's seriously just completely up to individual preference and individual what your boundaries are. Unfortunately, in today's society, identifying as transgender, and especially non-binary, is exceptionally difficult and frustrating in all sorts of different fields. For example, just pretend for a second that you identify as a non-binary gender, and you're going for a routine doctor's visit, and you step in and they hand you a form, and it has these two little boxes on it, male and female, and it says indicate your gender. Which one do you pick? Some people will tell me, oh, well, it's a clinical setting, just put your biological sex. There are still issues with even that, because there are people who go on hormones, there are people who have surgeries done, not to mention there's a psychological aspect of it too, which is still counted as medical. There are also people who actually do not fit into a binary sex category. This is called intersex. It's when you cannot be put into male or female cleanly based on just physical attributes. So as you can tell, these have a lot of profound effects on the way that you interact with the world, and medical treatments, just even personal relations, and constantly being fit into either male or female for people who don't can be extremely psychologically distressing, and it can cause anxiety and all sorts of different things. People who identify as transgender or non-binary, it's a very long process and often takes several years to kind of come to this conclusion, particularly because it's not something a lot of people know about. Do we have the time? Am I about out of time? Okay. Okay, that's all I have time for then. If you've got any questions, I'm going to be here literally all day, probably in the back or something. You can go to nonbinary.org. They have a really nice, it's a really good place to kind of get your foot in the door with exploring this. Also, you can drop by the Rainbow Room here. They've got a bunch of info, and that is it. Thank you.